You're listening to the WCEG Network on WCEG talkradio.com. Click your live stream tab or watch us on your live smart television, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, WCEG Network. I am your host for the next hour, Damita Chatman. Some call me the godmother, some call me the queen, but I'm just Damita. Where we speak life into the community. Last week, please subscribe us on your YouTube channel, WCEG Network. Like us on, follow us, and connect us with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Download us on your iPhones, your pads. Go to Google Store, search for WCEG Talk Radio. Lastly but least, this is opinions of the show, not the show, but the host and the guest. Today, we're going to do a part 2, bringing back Miss Camilla Moore. It was a hot topic. We heard from the community, and they wanted a part 2. Again, Camilla Moore, I want to thank you for taking the call at a short notice. I'm going to give you a minute to kind of tell who you are, and then we're going to dive into the show. Again, thank you.
You're right. Well, Damita, it's always wonderful to do anything with you. You know, we go back a long way, history, making cityhood. I'm just going to keep this in a nutshell, keep it rather brief. I was a part of the cityhood movement. We had the largest group, which was the People's Campaign, which in my opinion was responsible for us being a city today. And I was the chairman, along with you and others, and about 5,000 volunteers who, worked this community to make sure that our cityhood became effective on a referendum. And then after that, the governor appointed me as a transition chair, whose responsibility it was to set up the government so that the elected officials that came in could hit the ground running. So I've had a lot of city manager experience. My whole life has been in government, and management is some aspect. So I think that I am equipped to talk on this topic. And I think that my experience could lend or provide some answers to citizens that may have some questions in terms of what good government should look like, in particular, the city of South Fulton. So I'm excited about this talk show today.
And thank you so much, Camilla. I'm going to probably be looking down a little bit because I got questions that people sent in, and although I know Camilla, she's just like the rest. She don't get the questions. I'm just going off the cuff, and if she good, as she says she is, she'll know these questions. The first question I have, Camilla, is what is a city manager form of government and the role of the city manager versus the mayor and council?
I think we briefly touched on this the last time we had this show. Every city, particularly in the state of Georgia, outside of, the city of Atlanta and some other urban centers, we have a city manager form of government, and that is actually listed in the city charter. One of the things that I would encourage every citizen that is watching today, if you want to know the rules of how the city of South Fulton operates, go pull up the city charter. That is our Bible. And in that particular document, it speaks specifically to the role of the city manager. The city manager is the chief operating officer for the city. The way that the Constitution of Georgia is written, elected officials create policy, professional folks administer and make sure that those policies are done. So when I think about specifically some key bullet points that citizen needs to remember is: 1, the city manager is appointed by mayor and council, and he serves at their pleasure. 2, he is the chief operating officer for the city. He is responsible for overseeing all of the day-to-day activities for the city. He is your go-to guy. He is the primary advisor to mayor and council. He is the one that makes recommendations in terms of what needs to happen in the city, because he's the person that's running the city on a day-to-day basis, and he carries out the policies for council. One of the things that I really want to point out, that in terms of best practices, it is usually a city manager's agenda that is presented at a mayor and council meeting, simply because since he's there day to day, he has a responsibility of understanding what is happening within the organization and is in the best position to bring forth those agenda items in which public policy needs to be made or action by mayor and council. So he is, or she is, the point two person that actually makes things happen on a day-to-day basis in the city outside of public policy.
Great, thank you. Here's another question. Give suggestions on tools or measures that the mayor/council can adopt to help them govern themselves. Give me some examples after you talk about that.
Right. You know, we talked about this last time. It all starts with a great city manager. And I know that they have the interim city manager that they have, you know, is a good person, right? Has a lot of qualifications. But, you know, it all starts with your city manager. He or she has to be equipped to do the job. Now, I would personally say, and this is just my opinion, we have never had a qualified city manager to manage this city since the inception of the city, because everyone that has filled that position up to this point lack the appropriate skill sets to run a city of this size. So, you know, what are some things that we should look for in the next city manager? Don't hire a city manager unless he or she has 10 years of experience in city management, not county management, city management. There's a lot of parallels and similarities between county management and city management, but constitutionally, they have different mandates and different responsibilities. So what we should look for, or what mayor and council should look for, is a person that has 10 years of experience managing city government. Two, if they don't have prior experience with managing a city of 100,000 people plus, do not hire them, right? I mean, why do we want to hire a city manager who historically has only managed 30,000 or 40,000 people? There's a big difference in terms of managing a city of 30,000 versus 100,000 plus. So a criteria, unless that person has managed a city with a population like ours, do not consider them. Three, and let's talk about the budget, right? It's one thing to hire a city manager that has had experience with managing a $30 million budget, right? It's different than having a city manager that has managed a $100 million budget. Right? They know what to do with the money. So you need someone that has the experience with dealing with a large budget like the city of South Fulton. And two, employee base, right? Why would we hire a city manager who's never managed more than 275 people when you're approaching close to between 800 and 1,000 employees? And you have a large public safety, which is fire and police. Why would you hire a city manager that does not have the experience in managing a large public safety division and other staff? And so that would be another criteria. And then, you know, we should look for a city manager that has a strong personality, right? What do I mean by strong? Assertive in the fact that they are not afraid to tell mayor and council the truth, what's real as an advisor, whether you like it, dislike it, agree or disagree. The role of a city manager is to provide the facts and not be afraid to provide the facts in fear of being fired.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think, and I think we didn't have, we didn't have 3+ city managers right now in the city of South Fulton. Do you think the city of South Fulton will be able to find a city manager with that great background to come and help?
Yeah, I think so. If certain things are in place, no one wants to go to a government that's dysfunctional. I mean, no matter how much money you put on the table, right? They don't mind the challenges, a good city manager, but they do want to come into a system or a structure that's functional. And so in order for that to happen, there are some things that mayor and council is going to have to do to check themselves. And there are some other things that they're going to have to put in place regarding themselves that allows a city manager, or he or she, to come in and clearly understand that they are the city manager. They have the rights and responsibility to do their job without interference from the elected officials. And I think if all of that is understood in the interview process, I think anyone will come. But right now, you know, we have to get over this hurdle in terms of perception, in terms of how we're viewed, not only in the state, but how we're viewed nationally. But I think there is an opportunity to do that once there's a clear delineation of what those roles are and the independence given to a city manager to do their job.
So let me ask you a question. And do you think that the city of South Fulton should hire city managers that have maybe 2 or 3 years background, but come in on our tax dollars to get, I say work experience and then move on? Do you think they should hire city managers for that?
No, I would go back to what I said initially. The next city manager, the citizens should demand that they don't bring in anybody with less than 10 years. This is not, for new cities that they're still in the process of forming itself. I mean, we're 6 years out, so in essence, we're still a new city, right? This is not a job that allows you to train on the job. This is a job that requires experience. And so therefore, we should look for someone that has all of the criteria that I just listed, right? No, not 2 to 3 years. If you don't meet that minimum requirement of 10, then you should not be considered. And in the when they solicit for the position for the more permanent city manager, those type of requirements need to be clear. Therefore, you won't have anyone submitting applications that don't meet those minimums requirements, such as 10 years. And I would say this, like I said the last time, more than likely, the next city manager will not be someone from Georgia. It will probably be someone from one of the larger urban centers out of states like California, Texas, New York, and some of the others, right? Or they would come from the larger metropolitan area, maybe like Albany, consolidated governments like Bibb, Macon, or Columbus, right? But it won't be from the traditional cities because the population and the budgetary and the experience is just not going to be there.
Okay. Here's another question, and I'm trying to get the cell phone. What are there any measures that can be put in place to punish the mayor or city council who violate the city charter?
Okay, we talked about this, I think, during the last show. In terms of best practices, you just spoke about, how could we attract, a qualified person to be the next permanent city manager? There are 2 legislative measures that governing bodies can use to check themselves. Excuse me. One is by the adoption of resolutions, which are not found in the charter, but they are laws which govern the behavior of your elected body or can be used to govern the behavior of elected bodies. Resolutions can be used for a lot of things, that happens within a city. But in terms of checking what elected officials do, that is a good idea to use resolutions. Ordinances, on the other hand, are much more permanent. They are, in essence, similar to your charter. So, they exist. But the quickest way to actually check yourself as a governing body in terms of best practices is to do some resolutions. So let me give you an example, if you don't mind. I want to talk about a few because we talked about this the last time. Best practices from cities that I've managed. There is resolutions by elected officials that limit their use of public facilities. Most citizens don't know, but public facilities are taxpayer paid for. And every time there's an event at a public facility, there's staffing, police, fire, and there's a whole lot goes into it. And so, what a lot of elected officials do, they will limit themselves to the use of public facilities outside of, council meetings. This is for social events, right? That they just decide they want to have. They, by resolution, say that we're only going to use the art center, twice a year for a social event. Another one is that, they need to do resolutions that deals with stricter guidelines for their own personal budgets, right? All of us understand that they have their own budget, but one of the calls I got was the use of a council person's or a mayor's budget to put in flooring in a city building, right? Okay. Resolutions need to be created to basically say that if we give you as an elected official or you approve yourself a budget, there needs to be guidelines that speak to how those monies are used. A elected official should never be using taxpayer money as a part of their budget to do anything that deals with infrastructure, that deals with anything that deals with putting in anything for a public building or anything else in a park or anything else. That's not the purpose of why you have a personal budget, right?
So let me just jump in, because I'm gonna use this as an example, and you don't have to say anything but answer it, but it's all on me. I put out, maybe last year, I went down to the city hall, and I noticed that our mayor's floor in office was tore up. Nothing in that office but concrete floors. And I raised the question, what happened and who did this? And I think the flooring was like $10,000, but the floor is still not down. And you telling me that we don't use, they wasn't supposed to use taxpayer dollars to do that.
Now, what I'm saying is that the whole purpose of having a public buildings budget is to budgeting. And so for those items, so if the mayor should not have been allowed, I'm gonna say it just like this,
Okay.
to use money from his personal budget to put down any floors anywhere. That's a public that belongs to all taxpayers. If there is an issue with the flooring in City Hall, that issue should have been taken to the city manager. The city manager should have someone from public buildings to examine what the problem is, and a cost analysis to repair the floors. Some floors, all floors, any floors, should have gone to mayor and council for a vote, because that is a public building. And so the entire council should have made a decision whether or not those funds out of public buildings budget should have been allocated to fix those floors. So for me personally, that's totally inappropriate. And that's why I go back to speak to why certain resolutions like this need to be in place that speak specifically as to how they individually can use taxpayer dollars as a part of their personal budget to do these type of things. And those budgets should be transparent. You know, another best practice that we talk about, Damita, is that there's nothing involving money that you and I shouldn't know about, because it's our dollars that make it happen, right? So even in terms of their personal budget, I mean, cities that I have been in terms of what those budgets were, what those items for purchase were available to the public to see how their taxpayer dollars were being used. So, you know, that just goes to another resolution. You know, another resolution that needs to be in place is, I mean, as people know, you talk about what's being in the media. I mean, I get calls all the time and they're saying, who controls your media? Who speaks for the city of South Fulton? You know, everybody shows up on Channel 11 or Channel 2. Well, that's traditionally not what takes place for good government. I mean, there's typical resolution that speaks to who is the media response for anything that happens to the city. And typically that is going to go to your city manager, and then it's going to go to your communications director. And they are the ones who should be speaking on behalf of the city regarding a media issue. And if it involves hearing from an elected official, the council itself needs to have a discussion in terms of who that spokesperson should be. If it's an issue that has happened in a particular district, naturally that would be the council person that represents that district. But the first face that they should see or hear from is the city manager and the communications director. And then the last thing, you asked about how they could check themselves. You know, they should have sanctions. I mean, they need to sanction themselves, right? Now, what does that mean? That means that you can censor them. You know, when we have violations of the charter or things or behaviors that they're doing, then, you know, the council has the right to censor their members for bad behavior. And so, you know, those are ways that they can, you know, check themselves. You know, there's some other suggestions in terms of some resolutions that could be adopted by them that helps, you know, rein in, you know, some of the behavior that allows a city manager or a new city manager to feel more comfortable by taking that position because they are truly the city manager running the city, the day-to-day activities.
Okay, great. Another question we have, how can, I want to make sure, ways in which city council meetings can be shorter, more organized, and more effective?
Right, this is kind of hilarious because I got a text, I guess, at the last council meeting I think someone said they started at 3 and they did get out to 9. Now that is a little bit much.
I think I'm a correct that. I think it was about 10:30.
Okay, all right. Okay. I mean, this whole thing about citizens being involved in government. I mean, I really do think more citizens would probably come to city council meeting and probably watch it via Zoom. But who's going to do that for 8 hours? I don't think anybody in their right mind, right? So that definitely needs to be addressed. I think one of the things in terms of best practices that a lot of jurisdictions do, and what I've done in the past, is that your elected officials need to be time limited. What do I mean by that? You get 5 minutes. If there's an agenda item, you get 5 minutes to speak on that. And that's all. If there's any additional comments that you want to make, the entire body has to agree to give you more time. But other than that, you're on the clock. And there's a clock visible to let you know that you're approaching your 5 minutes and the buzzer goes off. So, sometimes elected officials like to hear themselves, right, talk, but your citizens don't want to give you 8 hours. So, one thing is that you need to put yourself on a time. The second thing is that you need to use consent agendas, right? I mean, what's the purpose of having work sessions if the work session is not going to pre-discuss what it is that's going to be on the next agenda? And so, all of the debate and all the discussion and all of the issues, if you can get a consensus on the majority of those issues, put them on a consent agenda, leaving the most controversial items off for discussion and debate. I mean, that will knock out a lot of times because all of those items you can adopt at one time. 2, I don't know if there's a resolution that speaks to who the parliamentarian is for mayor and council. In some jurisdictions, it's a city manager. In some jurisdictions, it's a city attorney. Some jurisdictions, it's a city clerk. But there needs to be an identifiable parliamentarian that when this stuff gets off rail, Damita, someone can rein it in, right? They can just say from parliamentary procedure, this is cut, your 5 minutes are off. You can't say this, you can't say this, and whatever, right? And then 2, they need to utilize the city manager and the city attorney better. So going back to items on consent agenda, if in your pre-discussion, you know that there's a topic that's not going to be a part of the consent agenda, why are you waiting to the meeting to ask the attorney if there are any legal problems, right? Why do you wait to a meeting to ask the city manager if this can be done? You know what the item is. You got 7 to 10 days for the city manager or the city attorney to provide you an answer or whether there are legal issues or whether or not it can be done. And so when the item comes up for discussion, rather than having chaos about whether or not legally you can do it, you already got the answer. So now you can have a discussion based on these are the facts that were given by the attorney. We can legally do this. The city manager says that this can happen and you move on. But a lot of time can be wasted because you don't even know whether or not you have the legal authority to do something or whether or not it's appropriate. And then the last thing I would add, Damita, is that they need to re-examine the whole public comment process in terms of when people come to speak. It needs to be a very respectful process that is expedited. If I'm coming to speak to an elected body, I'm coming to voice my opinion, but I don't want it to fall on deaf ear either, right? So I come up and speak and then I sit down, then what, right? In best practices from jurisdictions in which I've managed, every time a person comes for public comment, the mayor will say, Mr. This city manager, take a notation of that. Miss Damita, get with the city manager after the meeting so that we can get your resolution, right?
Put a pin there. I'm gonna ask you a question because I want you to answer this. What if you have, because I've watched several council meetings from our city, when you have the perception that the mayor have these different people coming to the mic to tear down the council, what happens when you fall into that?
Well, you can't deny public speech. I mean, there's a constitutional right to free speech and to express your comment. So, that's not a new tactic. A lot of people do that. I just think that council needs to understand that if there's a situation where an elected official is going to crowd the assembly hall to do or say certain things, then you need to have a measure in place to deal with those antics. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so, typically what a lot of jurisdictions will do, let's say 100 people showed up to talk about the same issue. Well, y'all only get 10 minutes for 100 people. So y'all need to decide who's going to speak for that 10, because, on this issue, we don't want to keep hearing people come to the mic saying the same thing. We got it, right? So, collectively try to get them to get to the point versus having 100 people say the same thing. So, that's just a suggestion.
Right. Camilla, what happens when it just comes to me? This is not a question from the people, it's a question for you. What happens when you have elected officials that go rogue?
You know what? That goes back to talking about what are some things that citizens can do and what council can do. And I will probably spend some more time on that. I guess I can go ahead and talk about it now. Citizens always have a recourse. Elected officials always have a recourse. So it defines on what we mean by rogue, right? And so, but it is real clear in the charter. It is real clear in federal law and state law what behavior and actions are unacceptable, right? And so when those behaviors become unacceptable, there are primary 3 options that are available to citizens. And there are actually 2 options available to citizens, and there's 1 option or 2 that's available to council. Mayor and council can always sanction their colleagues and the mayor by censure, right? They can always file a petition for removal based on behavior that they feel is criminal or civil in nature. That's always an option. And then citizens, one of the most powerful tools that we have, which is not real difficult to do, is recall. You can recall any elected official at any time based on a certain set of criteria that are not that difficult, right? I mean, you can recall somebody just based on malfeasance. They violated their oath of office, right? They failed to perform their duties as prescribed by office. So, a lot of times people think recall is a really difficult hurdle to do. It really isn't. You just need a certain percentage of the individuals who actually voted for that person the last election cycle, not the last presidential election cycle, not the last senatorial congressional, but the last municipal cycle in which the mayor ran or which a city council person ran. All you need is a certain percentage of that by petition, and you can do a recall. So, those options are always available for the wrong and bad behavior.
Okay, great. This is another question that came over. What issues do you see in South Fulton since we have become a city? What issues do you see?
I can only go by what I hear, because to be honest with you, I hadn't spent a whole lot of time, watching meetings for 8 hours because I was somewhere else dealing with those other cities. So I can only go by what I'm hearing and the little bit that I have seen. And I really think that it is an organizational issue, primary beginning with the elected officials. I say that's 99.999% of the issues that I see. And until, in my opinion, we have an elected body who truly understands their role and purpose, who puts checks and balances in place, like resolutions that govern their behavior, and that act in a manner in which makes citizens proud, only then do I think, it's a top-down situation. And once mayor and council are doing what they're supposed to do, acting in a manner they're supposed to act, having a great city manager, then this whole appearance, whether true or not, that we're dysfunctional, the whole appearance that our elected officials are violating the city charter daily, consistently, by getting over into operations, that has to stop, right? If elected officials go back and do what the charter tells them to do, which is make policy, make sure that your city manager implements your policy, then I think everything will be great. But you can't have elected officials talking to your fire chief, talking to your police chief, talking to your planning director, because the statutes are clear for every city charter. And I looked at this for the last time we talked, and I'm going to read to you what it says. It says that the mayor and city council or its members shall remember that, shall not deal with city officers and employees who are subject to the direction and supervision of the city manager. Nor shall the mayor or city council nor its members shall give any orders, directions, or directives to any such officers as city employees. That's what the charter says.
Wow.
So every time an elected official calls the planning director, you're in violation.
Wow.
Every time I call the police chief, you're in violation.
Woo.
Every time you call the economic development guy, you're in violation. The law is clear. And I think any city manager worth their salt who is put in a position of protecting the charter, protecting elected officials, and protecting employees is going to say, don't do this. If you want to deal with the fire chief, tell me, I'll set up a meeting, and me, you, and the fire chief can sit in that meeting. Because at the end of the day, it's not the fire chief responsibility, it's mine as a city manager who holds the fire chief or the police chief accountable. And so we have to do that, right? So violations. There's a law that deals with other violations that deal with ethics and conflict of interest. And we talked about this before, how developers would get you in orange, right? There's a clear law that states in the charter that as elected officials, they should be very sensitive and clear in terms of how they deal with developers and development. Because under the state and federal law, depending on how that conversation goes, Damita, you could be considered engaging in bribery. Be considered engaging in kickbacks, right? Because at the end of the day, if a zoning case comes up and it doesn't go the way that a developer thought you as an elected official told them it was going to go, then he's going to out you. And he's going to say, councilperson, this mayor promised me that when I brought in this rezoning, that I was going to get it approved. And so now that is grounds for an investigation, because it sounds like, well, why would you promise somebody that? Based on what reason? Was there a kickback? Is there a quid pro quo? You know what I'm saying? And so those type of violations have to be, given a lot of attention to. And I always tell elected officials, don't talk to developers, right? I mean, again, that's why you got a city manager. That's why you got an economic development director. And that's why you have a planning director to protect you from going to jail.
So let me ask you, excuse me, let me ask you a question, because see, sometimes people get amnesia, and I want it so plain that the baby can understand. I'm gonna give you an example. If we're finna build something over here on Butner, and a planning director, not planning director, but the owner of that land wants something built, do the city council sit down with that person? Because we're in Cliftondales, or do the city manager and the planning?
The latter. And let me tell you why. What was the point of us going through months, sometimes a year, in establishing a land use and a zoning ordinance? Anytime a developer wants to meet with anybody, it's typically because he wants to violate what you got. Because otherwise he could just go get the permits, right? I mean, if something is approved, why do I need to talk to the city manager or an elected official? But in those cases, if there is a development concern, for instance, if the developer, for this particular instance, don't like the zoning conditions that have been approved that lines up with the zoning ordinance and land use, and he wants some modification, the first person he needs to talk to is the city manager and the planning director, because those are the first two that have their hands on that item to begin with. And then whatever that discussion is, they should relay that to the city council person. And at the next meeting, if the city council person or the mayor wants to sit in on the meeting, by all means do. But your professional staff is your city manager and your planning director. It is not the elected official. And so all of that needs to go on the organizational side, and politicians need to stay away from that until they have to, but that is in conjunction with meeting with the city manager and city staff.
Okay, let me ask you a question. This question just come up, and it was a hot topic last month about this event supposed to take place in the city of South Fulton. And I got the emails just like maybe everybody else got them. I got all 50 plus emails, and looked like when it was being planned, it didn't go through the process. And then it also went through the mayor. If I go to put on an event, Camilla, do I go through the mayor, the city council? Who do I go to? And what is the process coming from you as a thought process?
Well, let me tell you what best practices say. No event should occur by any elected official unless it's a citywide emergency, which requires all city officials to come together. Anything else should be planned with the budget, because every event is a budgetary item. So let me go back to, I guess, the big controversy about the Easter festival, whatever that was, right? I'm just going to use that because that example came across. Well, Easter comes every year, right? I mean, it's just not since Jesus, rose from the dead, right? Easter comes every year, right? So most cities have events that deal with some type of Easter activity. Well, that should be a citywide event because it is a religious holiday. And so therefore, when you go to do your budget in the fall, you think about events that fall on national holidays, Easter, 4th of July, Memorial, Labor, Juneteenth, whatever. And you calendar that event, which means that it comes with a process. So let's just say, for instance, last year when they did the budget, if the mayor had said, I want to have a citywide Easter egg event, and this is what it's going to entail, mayor and council should have adopted that because it involves public property, fire, police, and staffing, which is my tax dollars and yours. So that should have been budgeted last year. So it would have been any surprise of an Easter event when Easter rolled around, because not only would it have been calendared, two, it would have been budgeted. Fire, police, and staff would have been aware of this event 8 months ago and would have been prepared to deal with all of the permits. Everything that happened would have happened. So this thing about our elected officials having events that have not been calendared based on the budget, I would recommend that it stop, simply because of best practices. Everybody's staff, it's disrespectful to staff when they don't have months to know that an event is coming, that permits are needed, that there's a protocol for these events to occur. That's planning, that's timing, and that involves staff effort, money, and time. And so I, again, would recommend that no events other than emergencies occur in this city that have not been calendared. I mean, every council person knows what they want to do. They do the same thing every year, right? Put it on a calendar, assign some money to it in the budget, and keep it moving.
Okay, another question just came through. Do you think that each district should hold their own book bag back to school, or should it just be for one for the whole entire city? And they said, because you have the same people going to each district collecting the same stuff. What do you say about that?
I'm just going to speak on best practice. It's kind of like the Easter egg thing, right? If taxpayer dollars is to go help kids go back to school, that's not a district thing. That's a city thing, because all kids go to schools in our city, right? And so traditionally, from best practices, back to school is a city event. Now, they may have distribution at different locations simply because of the, the land mass that we have to cover in the large area that makes up our city, but it still should be one city event, back to school on the same day. And either you can go down in South Fulton, over in Sandtown, Cliftondale, but it's all back to school. And then those resources collectively are gathered and dispersed to those sites. And you have to make sure that a person who goes down to south part of the city doesn't turn around and go over to Sandtown to get another set of bags. And so that's why this stuff has to be planned and calendared and budgeted. So you have 8 months of time so you can put those checks and balances to make sure that you can truly get more resources to more families as possible.
Okay. Here's one. What incentives can the city leadership and residents take to create jobs?
Well, I don't know. You remember the baseball movie that they had years ago where the guy said, if you build it, they will come, right? He took a baseball field and built it and they came, right? I mean, the same things applies for any city and economic development. If you put your time and resources in investing in your public infrastructure, they will come, right? And you got to give, some type of incentives that lessens the development costs of a developer doing business in your city. If he brings in a business and that business is going to employ people, then naturally you're going to get jobs. So, you got to look at incentives in terms, there's a variety of tax incentives out there that are available to governments, and that would take a whole hour in itself. But you have to have some incentives on the table that attracts a developer, that lowers his development costs, that allows him to build buildings, create businesses, to employ people. But that's typically in the form of infrastructure, because that is the largest cost to any developer, is the infrastructure costs.
That's the next question I was going to ask you. Another question is, what infrastructure changes to improve the quality of life for the residents?
Again, that has to be a package. I went to the website. I didn't really see, anything on the website that talked about development incentives, right? So if I was a developer and I was trying to come to the city of South Fulton, one of the things that they would do, they would actually go to your website and see what you got to offer that will attract me to come to your community. I'm not saying that it wasn't there. It could be there someplace. I just didn't find it. I didn't find it on the zoning and development site, and I didn't find it on the economic development site. It could be there and I could have just overlooked it. But, mayor and council, from a policy perspective, needs to create a resolution that speaks to what are the development incentives that deals with infrastructure needs that we can make a part of a package to solicit development to come to our community. And so that's something that has to occur. But again, if you have a great city manager, they're going to be on top of this stuff because, part of one of the main visions for any community is economic development, growth, and jobs. And that person, he or she, will make sure that those type of items are presented to mayor and council for them to consider.
Okay. Now here's another question, but I'm gonna read it and you can go. It said, what suggestions do you have for city leaders to increase public safety and further lower crime rates in the city of South Fulton, which under Chief Meadows' leadership, crime has went down, but you can answer that.
Right. I mean, for me personally, I think the chief is absolutely wonderful. Right. I mean, I have no complaints, and I have overseen a lot of police chiefs, and I have worked with a lot of them in my lifetime. So I think he's doing a great job. I think there's a perception in terms of our community And I will tell you, since we've been a city, in terms of crime, I think the chief has done a wonderful job. I would just say that the elected body needs to take the recommendations that Chief Meadows put in place to deal with crime reduction. And hopefully those recommendations are involves community input. I mean, every community is different because every community may see different types of crime. I mean, all you have to do is go to Ring, right? Or next door or something else, right? But I think what the police chief is doing, I just think that as the police chief continues to have dialogue with neighborhoods concerning what crimes exist, development of a comprehensive analysis and something legitimate that the chief can take to mayor and council. Well, actually needs to take it to the city manager, and city manager needs to take it to mayor and council along with the chief. And they need to talk about, from a public policy perspective, what elements of those recommendations involve public policy, what elements of those recommendations involves funding that needs to be a part of the next budget cycle. All of those elements needs to be in place. And then there needs to be some statistical benchmarks that really show some results. You know, we can look at the crime stats and see that since he's been here, those have gone down. I think the issue would be, how do you connect the lowering of the crime rate to a particular initiative, right? You know, it's just like when they were doing the drug bust and they were removing a lot of business licenses from places that had, you know, drug arrests so that those crimes would not continue in those type of establishments. You know, being able to go back and correlate a reduction in those crimes based on particular policies.
Okay, here's another question that came in, and I'll probably get beat up for it, but I got the answer. They said, what happens when the city leader goes against staff recommendations or the police chief recommendations?
I mean, at the end of the day, constitutionally, they are the decision makers, right? Recommendations are just that. Recommendations from city manager are just that. Recommendations from any department is just that. The difference is it in your charter, right? That's a whole different ball game, right? So they have the right to go against recommendations, but if you have a recommendations from your police chief and you have a recommendation from your city charter, from your city attorney, and it concerns an issue of your charter, under no condition should you violate your charter. What's the purpose of having your ordinances, your resolutions, if you're going to violate it, right? I mean, you might as well throw it all out the window. If you're going to violate this ordinance based on the recommendations from the police and the city attorney, throw them all out, because you are obviously not an individual who we elected to uphold the laws of this city. And if you can casually go against any law, you can casually go against any law. And so I would just say citizens need to take note of individuals who violate our city charter, who violate our city ordinances, who violate anything that pertains to our laws, and consider whether or not you want to reelect them. That's what I would say.
Okay, here's another one. What measures should be taken to bring more business to the city of South Fulton?
You know, city manager, economic development, and your zoning folks, they're the key with community input, right? I mean, again, we did a land use and a zoning ordinance for a reason, right? And the whole purpose of that document is for growth in every area. And so, you know, if it needs tweaking, we need to do it. But if not, you know, we need to run with it, right? And we need to put things in place that provides incentives for that document to be a living, breathing document that has results.
Okay. Here's one. What do you recommend assuring the city leadership that further promotes transparency, accountability, and ethical practice?
Okay, so here's one that I get all the time. I think our elected officials need to go back and read campaign laws and the ethics and everything. You have a code of conduct. So let me give you an example. I'm not quite sure that our elected officials know this. If I ran for office and a developer gave me a dime, I can't vote on anything that pertains to him as long as he comes before council. If I am an elected official and you have a restaurant or you have a business and you allow me to have an event in your establishment, if I don't report it, it is an offense. It is a violation of federal, state, and local law, which can result in civil or criminal prosecution, right? Every gift that you get from anybody, you have to report. So Damita, you have a restaurant, I call you up and say, hey, can I have a fish fry at your place, right? You say, come on in, Camilla. I've got to report that on my disclosure. I got to tell Damita allowed me to use her restaurant for my constituents for a fish fry. And I have to put a dollar amount. Now, if Damita gets in trouble down the road and your item comes before me, I can't vote on your item because you have gotten something from me that I have disclosed on my disclosure report. So if any elected official has gotten a contribution from a developer, have gotten a gift from any establishment, and an item concerning you, them comes before you to approve zoning, permitting, or anything, you have to recuse yourself. You have to say, I cannot vote on this item because of a conflict of interest. And you can share that they gave me a donation or I use their business. You don't have to do that. You just need to say that there's a conflict of interest. But for this council or any other council, if someone pulls your disclosure today and they discover that you got a gift or donation from anybody who later came before you on an agenda for action, you're in trouble. That's all I'm going to say.
Wow.
Unless you put it on your disclosure to show that you got that gift or donation, but you still have to recuse yourself. You can't vote on it. It's called bribery, kickback, money under the table, however you want to do it, however you want to label it. But the laws for Georgia and the feds are clear. So, if when in doubt, call the campaign division, and citizens, if you think some of your elected officials are doing something unethical, I mean, they have a code of conduct, which I think needs to be strengthened, but that will be with resolutions. That's a story for another day. You have a resource. There is a state agency that you can call and complain about your elected officials. If you think they're violating certain things that pertains to gift, campaign contributions, and actions that pertain to public policy in which they were recipients of any type of gift or donation or for a favor.
Okay, we got 5 minutes, and God, I can talk all day with you, but this is a question that just popped up. What is the importance of a code enforcement?
Well, there's statutory laws. I mean, that's a story for another day. But a code enforcement officer, primarily traditionally, is to enforce the codes for development. Really, that's what they're for. The whole purpose of code enforcement is to enforce the laws that deal with anything that deals with development, whether it's under the zoning side or whether it's not on the permitting side. It's going to deal with some city code that relates to some activity that has an ordinance. And so that's what their job is. I mean, their job should be clear. I do think that the environmental court that we're supposed to have, probably needs to be strengthened and have a little bit more teeth to act more like a traditional court with some real teeth in it, so that when there are violations, that you don't have repeat offenders, because it's like going to court downtown, right? If a judge finds you, it's not going to be a pretty day, right? And so, the environmental court needs to have that type of strength so that your code enforcement officers have pull, because you go to jail, you don't pass go because of the fines. And so it stops that. It keeps, repeated offenders from occurring, and it encourages people not to be offenders because they don't want to go to court to see the judge.
Well, Camilla Moore, we ain't come down to the last, I'd say 3 minutes of the show. I want to thank you in your closing remarks. Give me your closing remarks.
You know what? I'm going to listen. I will say this again. Mayor and council need to check itself. It needs to put resolutions in place to do that. They need to stay out of operations. Hire yourself a great city manager. You got a good interim city manager. Let that person do their job and stay constitutionally to the functions that are prescribed to you as listed in your charter. That's it. And if we abide by the rules and get good people in place, we'll be just like any other city where we can sing and ring our name.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Camilla. And I know once we get over these hurdles and get the city off of Similac. Now they on Similac. Now they ain't even on home right now. They're still on Similac. Get them off the Similac. I think we're going to be fine. We got a great city. I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for answer the questions. We got so many questions here that we didn't even get to. I'm going to tell the listeners to be looking for some stuff from my organization, Citizens for Excellence in Elected Leaders. We're going to be putting out stuff. We're going to be working with Camilla. And then we might do another show, but right now we got so many comments and questions that we didn't even get through. But I want to thank you, Camilla, for giving us your time, helping us to understand. And I'm going to tell the city that we're going to be all right. We just got to get through. We didn't even hit on the trash thing, Camilla.
Oh, yeah. Procurement is a whole nother story.
Yeah, procurement is a whole different thing. We're going to have to hit that later. But again, I want to thank you guys for watching Take a Stand today. Thank you for your comments, your feedback. Thank you, Camilla. Again, I want to say, let's just keep on doing what we're doing to make the city of South Fulton great. It's a city that sits on a hill.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much,
Camilla. Thank you.
Bye-bye.